podcast peeps. I am Miss Natalie Ann Diaz the 19th.
Oh, the 19th.
What's your name today?
Lauren Ann Oak, the first.
The first. I'm not the 19th or whatever number I just said. Speaking of that, that's what this episode is all about, having ADHD. I love it. So for those of you that don't know, I am actually diagnosed with ADHD. Wasn't diagnosed since post-pandemic. But of course, I've had this since, teeny tiny kiddohood. But when you're like 7, you just assume that everybody thinks the way that you think. And then you realize, what? Nobody else has squirrels running around their head all day long? I don't know how you normies do it, Lauren. Speaking for the typical minded, you are, but you're like human volume. You're like the other side. You're so calming and chill and collected.
I've been called human Xanax.
That's what you are.
Yes.
You are. Even my mom said that, by the way, about you.
Oh, your mom's the best. Love her. Let her come live with me. We have space.
You do, actually. She would totally. She can make it up those 4 steps. She was fine. It was really good. But do you think Dan may have a little bit of the smidge?
Totally. No, I am pretty convinced that he is undiagnosed ADHD. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's I don't want to say it's a lot of us, but the funny thing is it's really hard to even know if you should ask somebody to get diagnosed, because a lot of us that do have ADHD, we don't know that we think differently. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it really is because of social media, unfortunately. When you watch a TikTok and they're like, living with my ADHD wife. And I'm like, hey, that's my life.
I joined a Spouses of ADHD group on Facebook.
What do they tell you? Like, what advice do they give you?
We're all basically in the same boat. It's just like how they're unorganized. They don't finish their projects. They're just all over the place. Starts one thing and then jumps to another thing and always wants to go. But
you probably see that as a negative. I see that as my superpower, because look at all the things I got to try in my life. Everything from archery to putting together miniatures.
Miniatures? What do you mean by miniatures?
Literally, don't you remember my miniature phase during the pandemic where I was making miniature scenes?
Oh, yes.
See? I have a lot of hobbies, but I had to stop that one because my eyes couldn't handle it.
Magnifying glasses.
I got the magnifying glasses. I got the readers from CVS.
Wow. Amazon.
But how could you wear those all the time? I couldn't wear them.
I can only wear them when I need to wear them when I'm on the computer.
Okay.
Or if I'm reading something.
I probably need bifocals. But look, this is an ADHD conversation.
Yeah, I have bifocals at home, but I don't like those either.
We have a mutual friend. Let's just call her Monica. Is what we'll call her. And she also has a hint of the ADHD. And when her and I go out, it is so funny because we have 95 conversations in the course of 4 drinks. And sometimes we have to just stop and admire how many things we talked about because it's that impressive. You're like, do you realize, let's take a walk down memory lane of all the things that we talked about in this past hour. It's interesting. But today we're talking to Megan, who's a mom who has ADHD and she's autistic as well. And she's talking about raising her twins. Okay. So how does that play a role in parenting?
Yeah, that's got to be challenging.
Yeah. But is it? I don't know. See, the thing is I did raise my kids.
Yeah.
And so the thing is yes, my kids now openly make fun of me because they're like, mom, you're doing it. right? And I'll be like, okay, like when I'm going off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I think Johnny probably has a little bit of the ADHD. And so we would tell him to put his train back on his track when he was a little kid.
Yeah.
And so now they like to say that to me.
I should say that to Dan.
It's really.
He doesn't like when I mention that I think he's ADHD. He's like, in denial. He's super in denial.
But why is it bad?
He thinks there's a stigma with it. And I'm like, no, it's just who you are.
But who cares if there's a stigma? There's a stigma against blondes. I don't see you dyeing your hair dark.
He just is, I don't know. He just is not normal. So
he hasn't embraced it.
He needs
I have excuse me.
Like, yeah, heck yeah, I'm ADHD.
I think I wear mine as a pride. I would like to be medicated. I really did, but medication is in very short supply. So it is very difficult to get actual like ADHD medication, especially here in New York. And God forbid you try to get it during like NYU and Columbia's finals. Forget it. There's no hope of finding Adderall in the city. But I remember the first time that I took Adderall. I think I talk about this on the podcast. I remember I was on the phone with Genevieve. And I was like, okay, my heart's going to explode. I'm taking it for the first time. I don't know what's going to happen. I may die. I don't know. And she's like, calm down. You're going to be okay. Because remember, she's also a special ed teacher. So dealing with people like me is nothing for her. And I remember when I took it, I felt like so calm and chill. Okay. And that apparently was the kicker of knowing whether you have it or not. Because if you take Adderall and you don't have ADHD, you're like, bing, bang, bing, boom, jumping off the walls. Where if you do, you go into like a Zen calm state.
Ooh. Okay.
Does the opposite for me. So that is what we're talking about. We're talking to Megan today, and I can't wait for you to learn everything that she's about to teach us because she actually started an online program.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really cool. All right. You got to meet her. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, guys, here's Megan. Hey, Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nat. Thanks for having me.
Oh, girl, I'm super stoked. You, I have to say, are not the first autistic ADHD mama that we've worked with at Twiniversity. And so I am very familiar with the challenges that you probably have had because I've already had some insight. However, I'm so thankful to you because if you're willing to talk about this publicly, girl, let's just rip off this freaking Band-Aid and let's just get down to business because you are not the only one. And there is definitely still, don't know how, it's whatever year it is because it's a new one and I can't remember the numbers, but you are not the only one in our universe that has gotten a diagnosis either as a child or as an adult, and yet still is part of our community, right? Like, hello, we're all over the place and everybody is made differently and it's pretty freaking awesome. So give us a little bit of background into your initial diagnosis and why you even sought that diagnosis. And yeah, because I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are going to really hear themselves in you and maybe want to start the journey, but don't know how. So give us a scoop, Meg. Like, tell us, can I call you Meg? I apologize.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. So give us the scoop before we even get to the 20s. Give us a little scoop on the behind the music of why you got diagnosed and when and how that even freaking came up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was not diagnosed as a child. I actually got diagnosed 2 years ago at the age of 27. And the reason I sought out a diagnosis was because I'd been struggling with my mental health for about 10 years at that point. There were always signs looking back now, but they weren't super what's the word, disruptive to other people. They were disruptive to me internally. And so I mostly just kind of hid that for a long time. And then I went to college and my life just sort of imploded. You know, I lost a lot of support and had to start doing a lot of stuff for myself. And that's usually when disability becomes much more prominent because you lose all the scaffolding that was holding you together. So yeah, everything started falling apart. I got misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder. And we found out that was a misdiagnosis, mostly based on like meds, because usually, not always, but usually people with bipolar disorder cannot be solely on an antidepressant. It will make them very manic. But I've been on solely an antidepressant before and there was no mania. So they were like, yeah, that's probably wrong. But they didn't give me anything new. They were just like, yeah, good luck. I was like, oh, thanks. So I just started exploring, and a lot of ADHD stuff really resonated with me. And then a lot of autistic stuff really resonated with me. And I was like, no, autism and ADHD are for kids. Like kids have that stuff. And I don't know, that was just my thought. And the more I learned from autistic and ADHD adults about what it's like to experience those things as an adult, I was like, oh, yeah, that's me. So I sought out a assessor. I found mine on the Neuroclastic Directory of Diagnosticians. It's a really great, like, neuro-affirming directory. So I highly recommend them. They have assessors all around the world. So I found my assessor there, and she, to this day, is probably one of the most competent mental health professionals I've ever worked with. And I've been in therapy for over a decade, so I've met a lot of mental health professionals, and she's so great. She was so kind, and she just listened. We did like an hour-long interview. She gave me like 6 or 7 tests. She gave my husband some tests to take on like what he noticed in me. And then she was like, yeah, and the cool thing about when she gave me the results, she actually walked me through the validity measures, because a lot of neurodivergent adults are like, but what if I'm faking? Right. And she was like, no, here are the validity measures that are built into the test to kind of determine if someone is maybe exaggerating or faking, or, you know, putting stuff in there that isn't reflective of their reality. And she was like, you didn't pick up on any of that. You're not faking. This is real. This is what's going on. So that was my experience.
That's unbelievable. That's so brave of you to say, like, I got to keep digging, right? Because at some point you probably have had many days where you're like, we're never going to figure out what this is. This is just me. Let's call it a day. I'm done with this. But there's so many women specifically that don't get diagnosed with either autism or ADHD as an adult, because I think that there's a theory that we should know it all and should just do it all and should just like know what's going on. But you don't know that you think differently because you've always thought the way you do.
Yes.
That's a complicated sentence for people that are like, I have no idea what she's talking about. But there's going to be people out there that you're going to say, I kind of know I'm different. I don't know how I'm different. Is this even something I should look into? But I think it's definitely worthwhile, because it really is very validating to know that you are, you know, not making things up. Like you said, with all the triggers in that test, there's a piece of you that then says, okay, I have this diagnosis. I could tell people this, and then maybe they could either give me a little bit more grace, have a little bit more patience, or be a little bit more understanding, because I don't think the way that they do. And my brain doesn't work the way that theirs does. And I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
So when you were pregnant, and so you didn't have your diagnosis during your pregnancy, or did you?
I did not during my first pregnancy with my singleton, but with my twins, I did.
You did. Okay. So when you were experiencing that pregnancy with your singleton and not having the diagnosis, did you think that a lot of the things that you were experiencing were just pregnancy related? Like, did you blame pregnancy or parenthood on any of the things that you typically feel on a regular basis?
That's a good question. I think the first time I was pregnant, it was the first time I was pregnant. I didn't know what to expect. So I kind of just was like, this must just be what pregnancy is like, you know, which is super interesting because estrogen and dopamine are so closely linked and related. Pregnancy can have a really strong impact on ADHDers. Fun fact. And for me, this looked like really bad executive dysfunction, which is kind of like your brain has a CEO who's in charge of all the important decisions. ADHDers do not have a secretary to help the CEO, whereas neurotypical people do have a secretary to like, oh, ignore that itchy shirt tag, ignore that ping from your phone, like focus on this. Whereas ADHDers, we don't have the secretary, so we're just like pinging everywhere. And so executive dysfunction got really bad with my singleton. I was like, am I crazy? Like, what's happening exactly? But still, that pregnancy was still really, really good in comparison to the twin pregnancy. That one was hard.
So let's talk about the twin pregnancy. Did you anticipate having twins, right? As classic as they say, Meg, do twins run in your family, as they say, right? So regardless of whether they do or don't, I hate when people say that. I really do. And I don't even know how to respond. I used to respond that no, but they run all over my house. That's where they run, because I just got so frustrated with that. So when you did find out that you were pregnant again and, ready for perhaps a brother or a sister to your singleton, when did you find out, like how many weeks were you into your pregnancy before you found out it was twins?
Okay. So I was probably only about 3 weeks pregnant when I took my first pregnancy test, because I was like, I think I might be. And we were trying, we wanted a baby. So I was excited and it said no. And I was like, okay. And then a week later, I was like, we were going to an event that was going to have alcohol. And I was like, I still think I'm pregnant. Let me check again. And I was. And I was like, aha, I was right. And so after that, I went to the doctor at about 6 weeks. And probably a couple days before, I told my husband, I was like, I don't know if this is just because my singleton was a boy. I was like, I don't know if this baby is just a girl or if we might be having twins. Like, I feel really different than I did before. And he's like, Megan, every pregnancy is different. It's not a big deal. And I was like, yeah, he's right. He's super right. But I had that inkling, like this might be twins. And we went to the doctor around 6 or 7 weeks, I think. And she did the ultrasound and I wasn't looking at it. I was looking at my husband and she goes, so there's two. And we were both pretty excited right away. Like my husband was like, great, we're done. Because we wanted 3 kids. We're like, awesome. Which now we're rethinking. We're like, I don't know, maybe we'll do it again. But anyway, so we were both like, this sounds great. And yes, twins do run in his family and my family. And even though my twins are mono-di, so they're not genetic. So that's a whole other conversation, but.
It's always good. That's a good conversation, right? Like it's funny that people would just be like, oh, you have twins, period, the end. And we're like, but for me, I'm like, what type of twins are they? Right. Yes. And then even if they're identical, are they mirror twins? Like, I want to know everything. Like, what do we have going on? So yeah. So during your pregnancy, you initially thought that they were Momo twins, right? Or yes. Tell me a little bit. And then how did that go?
So when we initially went in, they told us there were 2. We were very excited. We went home. And then 2 days later, I got a notification from my chart. And so I checked it and it said mono twins. And I was like, oh, okay. So I Google it and started freaking out, obviously. Yeah. And because no doctor contacted me, like nothing, it was just a my chart notification. And so I called the doctor and she's like, okay, let's schedule you an appointment. You can come back in, ask all your questions. And I did. And they were like, yeah, it's a lot. It's very high risk. It's very scary. But I actually turned to the internet because I love TikTok. I'm a TikTok creator. Follow me at Meg Moxie. And I created a separate TikTok account for my Momo experience because I was so stressed. I was like, I gotta create some content about this. And people on the internet were so helpful. They were like, okay, just so you know, the prime time to find that membrane is between like 10 and 14 weeks. So don't freak out until then. You never know. They might find it. Like, it was so helpful.
So basically, for those of you that are listening that are like, this is my first episode of Twiniversity ever. Basically, what Momo would mean is that they live in one house with no separation, no wall separation, and they have one placenta. So it's one vending machine. So I always say it's one house, one vending machine is my very layman's terms of explaining this. And so why the risks are so great is because, first of all, having one placenta is already, complicated enough that they basically have to share the same food source. But if they share one home, they could get tangled into themselves. One could take up space and push the other one into places that they shouldn't be. So it's like they could get into a little brawl because there's nothing separating them. So you run into the danger of having these growing babies that could basically get a little tangled up in there. So finding that wall is a super big deal, because when you have that, when you're like, okay, they have their own private space for now, they could grow in their own homes, they could do their own things, and then you still have to worry about the shared placenta, but that is a little bit easier to take care of. And yes, that comes with its own problems, but it's problems that we do have answers to. So of course we don't want to have any problems, but if we do run into anything like TTTS or TAPS, there are some solutions to the problems depending on, the severity of it. So finding that wall between their two homes must have been like, what a freaking relief.
I almost didn't even ask. At every ultrasound, I was like, so do you see a membrane? And every time they were like, sweetie, no, there's no membrane. And a doctor actually told me, like, not the ultrasound tech, the doc was like, at this point in your pregnancy, it would be very unlikely to find a membrane. And I was like, okay, this is what we're doing. That's fine. I'm in. Let's do it. And I was really dedicated. Actually, I've been in therapy a long time, and I was really, really dedicated talking to my therapist and talking to my husband, because my husband and I kind of took different tacts when it came to dealing with the Momo thing, because he was kind of detached. He was like, okay, I'm not going to get super attached to these babies because we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. Whereas I was like, no, I want to be devastated. If something happens, I want it to rip me apart. And that's okay. I'm ready for it. I can handle it. I want to love these babies right now for as long as I've got them, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And so, man, I'm feeling a lot of emotions. I forgot what this felt like, because around, I think, week 15 or 16, so after that usual window where they find it, they still hadn't found it. And we were at the ultrasound appointment, and just half-heartedly, I was like, so you see a membrane? And she paused and she goes, wait, yes. And I was like, stop it. And she goes, no, look. And it was clear as a bell right there. I mean, it was thin, but it was there. Oh my gosh. I called my husband. He thought something was wrong because I just called him after an ultrasound appointment. So he just assumed something horrible had happened. And I was like, no, there's a freaking membrane. We were so thrilled.
Oh, what a relief. What an absolute relief. And I know that there's many of you out there that are going to have Momo pregnancies, and we'll deal with whatever it is. But of course, anytime you expect the worst, you're still always hoping for the best. Regardless, that's just human nature, or I hope it's your nature, or whoever's listening, because we have to have hope. Without hope, we got nothing, kids. So we gotta keep hope alive as much as we possibly can. How did your autism and ADHD have an impact on that waiting period? Because that's got to be tough, not to just consume yourself with the negativity sometimes, right? Because you could jump down a rabbit hole. It's filled with grease. The outside of your rabbit hole is literally, it's slippery, it's oil, it's grease, it's butter, it's coconut oil. You could just jump in there and you just keep sliding, and it's hard to kind of pull yourself out when you're in that deep dive. How did you freaking manage that?
Yeah. So I think there were two things. My ADHD really impacted the early part of the pregnancy, not just with the executive dysfunction, which definitely came back with this pregnancy as well. But I may or may not have made a TikTok account and posted a TikTok to that got hundreds of thousands of views before we told our family we were even pregnant. Because I am so impulsive. It just,
Yeah.
I have an idea and I do the idea. And my husband was like, Megan, God, can you just give me a minute? And I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. And as soon as he pointed it out, I was like, of course I shouldn't have done that. But it just happened. And I know that sounds bad. I'm not trying to take responsibility, but that's kind of what ADHD is like. It's like there's
Yeah.
a squirrel pushing a button in your brain that makes you do stuff sometimes.
Yep.
And so, anyway, so that was a big impact. And then with the autism, there's a really fun, interesting concept in the world of autism called monotropism. And basically, the idea is that most allistic or non-autistic people are polytropic, which means that they are very extensive in their knowledge and their interests. Autistic people tend to be intensive. We dig deep, we go deep on like one or two things. So I'm already prone to rabbit holes, basically, as an autistic person. Then you throw in the fact that mono twins like is just such a niche like
Oh,
topic.
yeah.
And I dove deep. I didn't get too swept up in the negativity though. I actually found another TikToker who had mono boys, which mono boys are even more rare. And she, had them successfully. They're both healthy and happy, which is incredible. And she documented her experience. She became a lawyer. Well, I feel really different than I did before. And he's like, Megan, every pregnancy is different. It's not a big deal. And I was like, yeah, he's right. He's super right. But I had that inkling, like this might be twins. And we went to the doctor around 6 or 7 weeks, I think. And she did the ultrasound and I wasn't looking at it. I was looking at my husband and she goes, so there's two. And we were both pretty excited right away. Like my husband was like, great, we're done. Because we wanted 3 kids. We're like, awesome. Which now we're rethinking. We're like, I don't know, maybe we'll do it again. But anyway, so we were both like, this sounds great. And yes, twins do run in his family and my family. And even though my twins are mono di, so they're not genetic. So that's a whole other conversation. But
how did you focus on that? Because truthfully, like Meg, honestly, you could have went the other way. Let's be honest, right? It's easy. And we've had the other mom that I've worked with did go the other way. And so it was, I basically had to find how to get a rope to her to pull her out. And, mind you, I have no professional mental health training. I just have an extraordinary amount of mom experience from working with so many different people. So the tools in my toolbox, although, may not be filled with that of a licensed clinical social worker, or a psychologist or any type of therapist, but they're just filled with things that I've picked up over the past, 14 plus years of working through Twiniversity and experiencing so many amazing families that have been so great by letting me into their lives to say, this is what's helpful. This is what I need. And then I could just apply those tools to other people. So how did you stay in that positive zone without slipping?
I think it's because I've gone the other way before on other things. And I saw how unhelpful that was. So like when I was originally diagnosed inaccurately with bipolar disorder, I totally went down the dark side of the rabbit hole. Like I was constantly Googling things that I knew would hurt my feelings. Like, I don't know why I did that. Like I would Google search. I was not looking to be a babysitter or a nanny. I had a job. I was fine. But I would Google, would you let a bipolar person babysit your kids? Because I knew people would be jerks about it. And they were, I don't know why I was like set out to hurt my own feelings and be upset and focus on the negative. Like the negative is what felt true. I actually do know why, because I grew up with a lot of kind of invalidation of negative emotions, or really all emotions, but especially the negative ones. It was like, buck up, cheer up, stop being dramatic. So to me, negative emotions felt like truth because they were always denied. So I really used to focus on negative emotions and really live there. Now I've been in therapy a long time. And one of the tools that a therapist gave me that I really love is this concept of helpful versus unhelpful. She's like, true versus true is important, but it's not the only thing that matters. It's true that when you get in your car, every time you get in your car, there's a very high percentage chance you're going to get in a wreck and die. But is it helpful to think about that? No, it's not. And so I took that same approach with the twins. I was like, look, there's a huge percentage something horrible happens here. There is. But number one, I'm dedicated to feeling what I feel, even if it's devastation, even if it's horrible. I'm dedicated to my feelings. Two, I'm dedicated to these babies. I'm going to love them for as long as I can love them, as best as I can. And three, I'm going to do what's most helpful for me and my kids. And so that's what I did.
I am stealing that. That is genius. The true versus helpful is great. My little trick is I have boundary issues, Meg. I don't know.
Same.
This is my big problem. And so and I only started seeking therapy from the pandemic. Like I never had any type of therapy as a kid. I think everybody should. I think we should all go to a therapist the same way that we go to a general practitioner every year. And I think kids should start seeking advice from people that could help them organize their thoughts and know if there's a secretary next to the CEO. And the sooner that we could find that out, the more help we could actually give our kids. But I'm a kid of the 70s, so I had a mom who didn't have the same beliefs that we do now, or a dad, and not for a lack of their caring, but just for a lack of information that was available, right? Because back in the day, there was no ADHD. It was only that's a hyperactive child, period, the end. And there was no treatments and there was no nothing. And you kind of got painted into this little box and you just stayed there. So the people that were diagnosed as hyperactive, there was like a very negative connotation to it because people didn't know how to handle that. So they just didn't. And that is dangerous to really do because that's not helpful to anybody. So when I was younger, I didn't have any of that support. But now during the pandemic, I think when New York State actually started offering free mental health support. So because I don't know if you guys remember during the pandemic, we were a little bit of a hotspot here in New York City, just a smidge. So while we had, the negative part of literally, we had so many people in my local neighborhood pass away and my kids had people that they've known. And just like, every week you're like, how many baskets are we sending out this week for sympathy? So the state really did some really amazing things and started offering free mental health support. So I was like, I'm taking advantage of this because I took advantage of it from a mommy point because I'm like, my kids don't want to do it. I've offered them the opportunity. They didn't want to do it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to help myself and put on my own oxygen mask for an overused term. And I'm going to figure out a way that perhaps I could get them to express what they're feeling a little bit more than I typically had, because that's just the way that I was doing things. And I learned so much. And my takeaway is the true versus helpful. I freaking love. But my big thing that I have a little sticker on my desk is what is your role in this? And that's my boundary kind of thing. And I'm going to tell you, I love to make roles for myself that don't exist. So I'm a big fan of that. But I was so validated that during that mental health counseling that I had, and I'm still with that same therapist and I love her. I don't know how she deals with me. Honestly, like the first thing that I say to her before we start talking is, I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry. Once again, boundaries. Hi, how are you? So, but I realized that what I had wasn't, my chaotic thoughts were also ADHD. I've never sought an autism diagnosis to be very honest with you. I was very satisfied with just kind of staying there. And I started taking medication. And it's so interesting because I know people are like, no, I'm going to learn how to live my life. Good for you. I think that's great. Give me all the drugs all the time. That is the way that I wanted to see what it was like. And I was so petrified that first time to take that first medication. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to explode. I'm going to die. That I stayed on the phone with my god sister for like 2 hours because I was like, Jen, you got to just like, I don't know what's going to happen. And she's like, okay, she had the day off. I had the day off. We just like stayed on FaceTime and we talked. And then like 2 hours later, she's like, how do you feel? I said, honestly, I feel like I'm at the spa. And she's like, what are you talking about? I was like, Jen, I am so chill and relaxed right now that it feels like I'm on like a sedative. And so interesting for those of you that don't know, ADHD medication would have the opposite effect and would act as like an amphetamine to people who don't have ADHD, but somehow that medication made me find my secretary. And it made me so chill and so delicious. And it was a good reasoning of why we wrote another book. That was one of the big things, but it was so validating to find that out as a mom, because then I realized, like, holy crap, I've always been a chicken without a head forever. I am always somebody who starts a hobby, invests in the hobby, stops the hobby, finds another hobby, invests in the hobby, stops in the hobby, right? But at the same time, there's so much positivity that ADHD can bring to somebody's life that I love talking about it in a forum like this, because it's like, dude, it's not a death sentence, thank God. And it's really not a negative if you know how to make it work for you. Long story short, I stopped taking medication for it about a year ago when my insurance decided they're not going to cover it. And so it would cost me about $600 out of pocket. And then also here in New York, because I believe that while New York State was offering all this free therapy, there were many therapists that were taking advantage of this and were misdiagnosing and misprescribing medications. So ADHD medication is often like a black box, medication. It's a higher status. So you do have to get it renewed every single month. You can't get a 90-day supply for the particular one that I was taking. So I would have to pay. The regular therapists that I was working with weren't prescribing medication anymore. So I would have to pay $150 for the doctor's visit every month, plus the $600 plus for the medication every month. And that is that's not even remotely feasible for my family, nor should it be. That should not be a thing. But it was so frustrating to me, Meg, because it's like I found like the golden ticket. And then they were like, well, you can't have it anymore because you're broke. And I'm like, thanks, everybody. So now I just live with it. And by knowing that this is what I have, I could put myself in check a little bit more, because now I know that I need an accountability buddy. And this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but we have a paid Twiniversity staff member that is my accountability buddy. But it really is an assistant, is what regular people would call them, right? So, but I have never had an assistant before, and I didn't know that that was something that I could do. But Twiniversity is a business. We do have employees of a business, and now we have a part-time person who basically is like, podcast in 10 minutes. You have to do this today, which truthfully is really a genuine secretary of a genuine CEO, like you described it. That's really what it is. Knowing that that's been a big help to me, which, by the way, I only found because I found a support group of parents with ADHD. Mm-hmm. That was online, and I joined that. And I'm like, kids, I can't afford this medication. How are we going to work this? And the people that ran their own business, they're like, you got to get help. You can't think your business is. Not that your business would fail, because clearly, I'm going strong for this many years, but like for realsies, it's benefited Twiniversity tenfold, because I have somebody that's kind of keeping me in line. And I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know if you could even see it, but like I have a poster board up there. But that's only one of them. That's only one of them, because I also have two in front of me, in addition to Post-it notes every place. But this is my method, right?
Yeah.
So I found what works for me as somebody who is fairly newly diagnosed, right? How have you been coping with it? And how are you coping with it with like your mommy hat on? Because I have the benefit of having big kids who, by the way, are also my accountability buddies, who are like, mom, you're going off the rails. And I'm like, fine. Right. Like so my big thing is I love to get micro-focused on things that literally I'm bad at. And I like to pretend that I can get good at it. So it doesn't usually work out. So, but my kids are like, Mom, like maybe let's let this sit for 24 hours and then let's do it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, all right, fine. And then I get mad at them. Fine. You're not letting my dreams be dreams. Like, no, you're letting my dreams be dreams. You're dream crusher. Right. And they're like, okay, let's go. How do you as a mom deal with that with littles? Because your kids are little. They can't put you in check like my big accountability buddies do. How has that been working out?
It's been interesting. There's definitely been ups and downs. I have chore charts that I do for like daily tasks.
Excellent.
We have one for my kiddo. We have one for weekly chores. So that's been somewhat helpful, somewhat effective. But yeah, I really taught myself a lot of executive functioning hacks and tips and strategies during and after my first pregnancy, because I was like, I didn't know what was going on. I just realized I had to deal with it somehow. Okay, when it comes to the motherhood aspect, I think one of the ways I deal with the like squirrel brain or the having trouble prioritizing all of that stuff, I do sort of a mix. I have dedicated time where I'm allowed to squirrel brain. I don't have to rein it in. I'm allowed to that's usually the middle of the night when I'm feeding the girls. I don't know, probably twice a week. I stay up for like 3 hours starting a drop shipping business that I didn't mean to start when I got online, Did that the other night. Yeah. So yeah, probably once or twice a week. I get up to feed the girls. It's 4 a.m. and I'm like, by the time I'm done feeding them, it's 5. That's a reasonable hour to get up. So I get up and I start fiddling around on the computer and I let myself squirrel. I get to do whatever I feel like doing. And having that time where I'm allowed to just be ADHD is really helpful, because it means later in the day when I actually need to get stuff done, it's like I'm not depriving myself, because I already had my time to be who I want to be and how I want to be. Now it's time to focus, and not obviously, but I also use the help of medication. I have like a non-stimulant and a stimulant. They work together for me. So that's something to potentially look into. Sometimes non-stimulant medication can also be effective. I'm sure you know all of this, but for listeners. And non-stimulants tend to be less stringently prescribed.
You can get those for the 90 days.
Exactly.
Yes,
90-day prescription, which is helpful with ADHD, not having to remember to refill a prescription every 30 days. Anyway, so yeah, we have the chore charts. We have dedicated squirrel time. My husband is a huge help around the house. He knows that household stuff is not going to get done unless he does it, or he tells me what to do and when to do it. Like, he can't just say, oh, can you switch over laundry? Because I will, with every intention in my heart, say, yes, of course I'll do that. Will I do it though? No, no, I will not. Unless he takes the time to be like, because he'll be like, oh, can you switch over the laundry? I'll be like, yeah, I'll get to it in a second. And he's like, no, pause, switch the laundry now, please. Or he'll say, when are you done? So I can check in and make sure you've switched the laundry, if it's something I can't pause, which is helpful. So yeah. And we've got a routine going now, which is good. The only thing we're adding to help with everything is, I'm sad about it, but it's good. It's a good thing. I'm working on not being sad because it's not helpful. We are putting the girlies into daycare, which is sooner than I wanted to do it, but I really have a full-time job now. Like, when I had my singleton, I didn't even have a business. I was kind of blogging for fun, but that was it. So my job was to take care of him and take care of the house. And so I did. But my job now is to run my neurodivergent life coaching business. That's what I do. And I thought I could do both for the first year, but they're just not getting the attention they deserve. And I want them to get the attention they deserve, even if it's not from me. So
good for you.
There it is.
Good for you. Good for you. Yeah. I could never even imagine having Twiniversity when the kiddies were littles. Like, it genuinely, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I've said it 1,000 times. I started Twiniversity the day they started kindergarten. So they literally walked in to the kindergarten classroom. I could even see what the outside of the school looked like in my head. And I was like, I got to do something, because I knew I couldn't go back to a traditional job, because my son was in after school therapies. And there's no job that's going to be like, sure, leave today. And, you got speech today, but, OT tomorrow. Like, I knew that there wasn't a world that I could live in that would allow that type of flexibility 19 years ago. Now it's a new universe. And so I do come from a line of entrepreneurs. I can remember my mom when I was super duper duper little, like before I even started school, my mom and my god sister's mother, the person that I was on the phone with, they started a business where they made cloth napkins for companies. And it was child labor, and I would like to report it, although I feel like the statute of limitations is over. But we would all the kids would help because our fingers were tiny, so we can make the corners super pointy, like when we turned them inside out before they sewed them up, because it would be 2 pieces of fabric. It was fascinating. So believe it or not, I'm going to tell my mom, who just brought me a cup of tea and is wonderful, but I don't think my mom realizes that how starting businesses like that have an impact on you being able to close your eyes and jump and try something new. So it's fascinating. And also, interestingly, the god sister that I also spoke of, that I was on the phone with for 2 hours during my medication time, she is a New York City public school teacher that is an executive functioning coach. And that's her favorite thing to do. So she is great with me, obviously, but like, we didn't know this growing up, and we're so close in age, that wasn't a thing. And so we both get so jealous of all the things that are available to us, like you, that do have people that you could say, listen, my squirrels, they are taking over the house. The squirrels they are running the show. Everything is happening. And I love that you are providing a service that you could be like, okay, listen, yeah, there's squirrels all over the house. That's cool. Let's figure out what we're going to do now. And those chore charty things, dude, you're like, I desperately want them. Like, it's tough to not Google that while I'm in the middle of talking to you. But weirdly, even if I did, my brain could still stay on multiple paths. So while people may see like, oh, she's everywhere, it's not always a challenge for me. Sometimes I really enjoy it. And, you're so fortunate to have a husband who really understands. Like, God bless him. I have a husband who does understand in theory, but in practicality, it's challenging for him. So my kids are great because they grew up with it. But one of the reasons that I could think about how my husband and I have been is that one day I was standing in the kitchen with him, and the kids were off in school. And I didn't really get into doing anything. And I saw that there was an orange on the counter, just a regular orange piece of fruit, nothing the color orange. And I said to him, when you see that, I said, what do you see? And he says, it's an orange. And I said, okay, what else do you see? And he's like, it's just an orange. I said, does it make you think of anything? He's like, I don't know, that I have to have more vitamin C. And I said, and he's like, why? What do you see? I said, well, what I see is the kids forgot to put that orange in their lunchbox. And because they didn't put that orange in their lunchbox, they're going to be hungrier after school. We have 4 sports to do after school, which means that I now have to prepare a snack. Like, my chain of thought of that orange was easily 30 plus steps where he saw an orange. And so I started preparing for all those 30 steps. Like, I was doing things for all those 30 steps. And I always just thought that other people thought that. Like, doesn't everybody think in 30 steps? Like, isn't that just the way it is? And it never even occurred to me, Meg, that people don't think the way that you do because you've always thought like that.
Yeah. I think my husband's actually the reverse. Like, he understands in practicality what needs done and like how to work with me and my brain. He doesn't always understand the theory behind it though. He's like, I don't like, why does your brain work that way? I'm like, my dear, because I'm autistic and ADHD. Yeah. And he's like, no, I know that, but like, he can't conceive of like, I have like pretty severe misperception of time. So like it's like being colorblind, but when it comes to time, I simply don't perceive it passing. And he does not grasp that at all. He's like, I don't understand, but he understands the practicalities, which are, he needs to text me or pop in. Like if we have to leave the house, he needs to let me know 20 minutes before. He needs to let me know 5 minutes before, and 30 seconds before. He has to have grace with me when I'm still rushing because I didn't perceive time passing.
Girl, I don't even know. I think we all need you in our lives. If somebody felt that they needed an executive functioning coach as an adult or as a child, what does that fall under? Like, I don't believe insurance would cover anything like that unless you were also a licensed clinical social worker or something like that. But in general, where does that fall? Like for kids, is that all under the education basis? If you suspect that your child may have something, do you speak to the principal or the teacher, or where does it start?
Okay, so I'm not an expert on the child side of things. I only work with adults 18 plus. So that's me. But I know of people who both work with children and work with, like, they do caregiver children, like duo meetings where it's like, hey, let's meet with both of you and chat about how to make not just the child's ADHD like work, but how to make this relationship work, because so often that can be a point of tension for ADHD children. And their caregivers. So I know of people. I'm happy to send you their links and everything so y'all listeners can check it out in the show notes. If you're an adult looking for like neurodivergent life coaching, especially when it comes to executive dysfunction, I actually have a freebie that you can check out. It's called Housework, Hygiene, and Hobbies. And it's how to get stuff done in all three of those areas. Even if you have ADHD, even if your brain is full of squirrels, it's all good.
It's amazing. If you suspect that your kids may need a little bit more assistance, there's also something called DBT therapy. I don't know why that's not taught in school. Like seriously, out of all the crap that we learn in school, I don't know why like DBT isn't included. And what is it? It's dialectical behavioral therapy. How do we say this word? I don't even know.
It's dialectical behavioral therapy.
So
and a dialectic is basically two truths that you hold at once. So dialectical behavioral therapy is all about holding conflicting realities together and allowing them to exist peacefully in your mind, as opposed to black and white thinking.
Yeah, it is absolutely extraordinary. And it's really a skill building therapy session. So some places offer it for kids as a one-on-one therapy, some offer it as a group, some offer it as both. But one of the things that it definitely offers is parent coaching. So there's a lot of places where if you have a child that is neurodivergent and you can't understand, I should send my husband to this DBT actually, now that I'm thinking about it, for wife coaching is what he should be going to. But it's something that we've discovered here that is available worldwide. It's not like, something fancy here. It was referred to us. I don't remember how it got on my radar, but it's so amazing because it's basically a set of skills and you focus on one long enough and you kind of master that skill before you move on to the next skill. It's not like, let's throw all these vegetables in this soup and see what comes out. It's like, we're going to talk about carrots this week and we're going to talk carrots to death this week. And you're really going to understand carrots before we move on to the onions and before we move on to the broth. So for those of you that are out there, and they do have adult DBT groups as well, and they have them virtually online, but that's another thing that typically is covered by insurance. So that may be something if you are looking to get some help and don't know where to go, you could always look up that. And the other thing is you could also look up therapists that specialize in neurodivergence that have something called a sliding scale, meaning that no matter how much money you have, meaning that how much money you have is dependent on how much you pay. So those are some things that are out there. But for the people that are out there that are like, what do I do? That's a genuinely good place to start, or finding people like Meg who offer a ton of tips on social and have resources that are available to you, that it's not just somebody that learned about these things in school. It's somebody that learned about them because they experienced them, which I think is where the value of you really lies, Meg. Like it was putting the cart before the horse. Like when you go and like, I'm going to get my master's in this. If you never experienced it firsthand, you're not going to be able to really connect with your clients or patients in the same way. So I think it's very important to try to find somebody who has both personal, which they don't always share with you, but sometimes they do if you're lucky, but somebody who has a personal experience with things in addition. So when you work with adults and you work specifically with moms or dads that are finding it really challenging to balance the whole work-life balance, which I think is honestly BS. And I just want to throat punch people. And I know that's very violent, but there's never going to be a true balance. It's really not possible depending on what stage of life your kids are in, because the more that they need you. The end, like you have to respond to them first. But when you get to those families who are like, what am I going to do? How do you start working with them? Like, what's that first step? Is it an intake? Is it not an intake? Is it a personal evaluation that people do on their own? What do you do, girl? Tell me.
Okay. So the process is pretty straightforward with me. So because I'm not a therapist, I can't diagnose. So I don't ever do intake in that sense. What I do is I have a Calendly link that I send people, and it has just a couple of basic questions, like, what are you struggling with? If you could magically fix one thing, what would it be? And how confident are you that you can actually make these changes? Because that tells me a lot. It tells me, where their struggles are. It tells me what they're searching for, what they would have in an ideal world. And it tells me where their confidence level is with everything too, which is helpful, because a lot of the stuff I do, some of it's very practical, but a lot of it's very mindset based, like teaching people the helpful versus unhelpful framework, stuff like that. So I actually have, how many moms am I working with right now? I think quite a few moms who I'm working with. And honestly, the biggest thing we work on at first, at least, is just getting over the guilt that they feel for taking an hour once a week to work on themselves. Like, it's incredible. And I say this as a total hypocrite. I also feel super guilty sometimes about this stuff, but just working on you're not a bad mom because you struggle with this.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a bad mom because you're disabled. This is a very, very deeply entrenched belief in our Western society about disability and eugenics, right? It's this idea that disabled people should not reproduce because they'll create more disabled people who can't capitalistically contribute to our society. And sorry for getting on a bit of a leftist rant, but I truly believe all of this.
It's fine.
So this is the idea that, this is where the idea that being disabled is bad comes from. It comes from capitalism. So if we divorce ourselves from that, not entirely because we live in it, so we can't just, live in fantasy land, but idealistically, if we divorce ourselves from it and say, no, being disabled, not being able to contribute to society in a financial way doesn't mean that I can't contribute to society at all.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I can't be an amazing mother in unique ways that a non-disabled mother couldn't be, perhaps, So I'm not a big ADHD as superpower person. That's just not my dynamic. I do see it as a disability for me, but I also see that the word disability isn't a death sentence, like you said.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's so interesting. And yes, it is very different for everybody. I unfortunately think I had to find a superpower in it, Meg, because I didn't know what it was. I feel bad even saying that. You're right. But for people, so I'm 47. And so many people my age, we just grew up thinking that you just have to make it work, similar to you, right? Just brush it off, walk it off. So we've been walking it off for a while, and we're like, okay, if I can do 15 things at once, maybe not all good, but if I can, then I'm gonna, and I have a card that a coworker bought me, and it's Ron Swanson. and it says it's better to whole ass something than to half ass a few. So I keep that up thinking like, I'm going to try to master a few things. So I've really been working on that for a long time. But I remember thinking that there's also, or not that I remember, but I know that there's plenty of people who think that that is BS, that that's not a thing, and that you are in control of what you do, when you do it, and how you do it. And those people, it's very difficult. But I will also tell you that sitting in my seat, right, and having to work with families who do have that theory. And so I'll work with an expectant family that is, waiting for their twins to get here. And I'll have one parent that has that very closed mindset. And I'll have another parent that is super duper oompa loompa, neurodiverse, that's seriously like, I'm like, girl, we got you. So it's interesting because I have to put on the hat of the empathetic of the disability, and how do I connect with that person when I totally can't understand him? But then that would be closed-minded of me to say that's not a real thing and you need to get over yourself, right? Because first of all, I would never say that. That's just not in my makeup, my genetic makeup. I would never ever say that to another human. But it's very frustrating sometimes when you see that people just can't freaking see the truth that's right there. Or sometimes you have a parent too that's in total denial of that, the way that they think is not typical. So did you read What to Do When You're Having Two by any chance?
Like I said, ADHD or reading is hard, but I am halfway through it.
Okay. There's no need for you to read it, to be honest with you, but it was written, I was hoping you were picking up what I was putting down. It was written in a neurodiverse style and fashion. And so was the new book, The Newborn Twins Guide. So we specifically worked with the publishers to make sure that things were written in a certain font, in a certain line spacing, in a certain paragraph length, so that if you are, I always think that new parents are somewhat neurodiverse anyway, like the postpartum period and the bed rest period and that whole time where you could start getting rabbit holey, that I've really put a lot of effort into Twiniversity to make it neurodiverse because I am. And I try not to say that Twiniversity is Natalie Diaz, but Twiniversity was created for Natalie Diaz, just Natalie Diaz of 2004. Right. And I can't read something like that. Like forget it. Like joining a book club, I'd rather have a root canal. Like to tell me that I have to read this in this time limit. And currently I am pursuing my IBCLC and I have to go back to college basically. Oh, that's how I feel about it, but it's got to get done. It still has to get done. There's still things that we have to do. For the parents that are out there that still have to get things done, are there like two things that you could tell somebody that it's like, okay, today consider this?
Okay.
Like what's those two things?
So we're going to give a practical tip and a mindset tip because Perfect. I think you need both. I think together you can do a lot of stuff. So the first mindset tip, as a parent trying to get stuff done, stop beating yourself up. If it worked, it would have worked already. Okay. You beat yourself with a stick like it's your job and it's not making you any more productive, is it? So just from a practical standpoint, why are you doing something that's not working? And a lot of times the answer is because I deserve it, because I'm not good enough, because this is the only thing that's ever worked in the past. And I know it's not working anymore, but it used to. And maybe if I just beat myself harder, no. You gotta let go of the beating stick, okay? And I'm not gonna let there be like a power vacuum there. We're gonna replace it with the practical tip, okay? The practical tip is something called June bugging. So I did not invent this. I found this on Tumblr back in the day. But June bugging, it's based on the way that June bugs try to get through screen doors. So basically what a June bug will do is it'll attach itself to the screen and then it'll kind of wander off, but then it comes back and it wanders off and it comes back and it keeps returning to like the initial spot that it connected. This is how I want you to clean your house. It is so effective. I want you to pick a really specific spot, not the living room. That's way too big, way too nebulous. Not the kitchen, not your bedroom, but like the kitchen sink. I will tackle the kitchen sink today. And what you'll do is you'll start at the kitchen sink. But in order to do the dishes, you have to clear off the counter. As you're clearing off the counter, you find a bill that you didn't pay. So you go online to pay the bill. And as you're online, all of a sudden you realize you're not cleaning the sink. This is where the beating stick used to come out, right? Instead of the beating stick, you're just going to gently be like, no, I'm a June bug. I'm just wandering. And now I'm going to gently return. And that's all. That's all you have to do. And I'm telling you, this is in my signature program, Neurodivergent Magic. We talk all about June bugging. And I've had people tell me the entire cost of the program was worth it for that one module because it radically changed how they clean. And it just made their whole living environment so much better.
Girl, you're doing it, man. That's it. I laugh because I call that if you give a mouse a cookie, like that's, and that's, my kids will call it that. They're like, mom, you're doing it. Because I have no problem with doing that. But I'm like, oh, I just did 14 things. All of them were done horribly. But yeah, June bugging sounds absolutely delicious. And, you know, I've even gone so far as to take a transcendental meditation class. And like for realsies, go and like literally we have the David Lynch Foundation here in New York City. And as a media member, I was offered a complimentary like education, which normally would cost about $2,000. So I went for like a month back and forth to learn how to meditate. And I had such a hard time. So they call it monkey mind, is what it would be called in the TM world. So it's the same thing as the June bug. Like it's okay to go off, but you got to come back. Like just stop and just come back. Just always come back. And so, and I think just in the meditation world in general, it's called a monkey minded, but it's really helpful. And interestingly, that studies will show that the more you June bug, right? Like the more that you come back to it, the more your brain could, as a nerd, I call it defrag, right? So like back in the day, we used to have computers, and when you had, even this conversation, I'm June bugging, but back in the day, your computer used to store files wherever the hell they were, wherever they wanted to. And then like once a month, you would defrag your computer, which is defragmented, and it would put everything together. So it's kind of like meditation, and realizing that you're a June bug, like defrags your brain and it starts getting everything a little bit more organized. Not saying that tomorrow you're going to wake up and be like, oh my God, I'm the world's most perfect XYZ. But you have to train yourself, and it is a process of education. And it's also a process of freaking acceptance. And just be like, dude, this is who I am. Okay, now I know who I am. Let's make it work. So Meg, for realsies, like this is genius. And I'm so glad that you're doing this. And I'm sorry that your kiddos got to go to preschool. They're going to be fine. I could guarantee you that 1,000,000,000%. But the fact that there is a twin mom out there that realized that, you know, there's this gap, right? There's this gap of education and resources that exists, and you're kind of filling that hole. So thank you so much. Sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, I'm thankful that we have another twin mom on our team that's really just trying to make this an easier place to be.
Yeah. And thank you for all the work that you do. I can't tell you how your Facebook group got me through my pregnancy, because
Aww.
it really was a rough time. And I could reach out to people, and they were so supportive. You've fostered an incredible community. So thank you too.
Listen, I'm trying. I'm doing my best here.
You're succeeding.
There it is. But I succeeded because I think at one point I knew that I couldn't do it by myself.
Mhm.
And I've always been part of a twin club locally. And there was always like, you know, the president and the director and the social blah, blah, blah. And so with Twiniversity, I was like, I can't wear all these hats. And I think I was probably about 4 years into Twiniversity before I hired somebody. But very honestly, like I didn't think Twiniversity was going to take off. You know, there's always a piece of you that's like, okay, if I have 2 people read this, I'm going to, you know, everything's going to be great. Never thinking that we'd be at a place where we reach millions of people a week, like literal millions of people. So in the very, very beginning, when we would have like 1,000 hits to our website a day, I would try to close my eyes and find venues that would hold 1,000 people. so I could physically get a mindset of what those thousands of people looked like. And now I can't picture a million people. I can't picture, I think it's like 1.4 million people is what we're averaging regularly. And I don't know what ballroom holds that. So hopefully someday I'll find it, but I'm going to keep doing it, guys. And I promise you, seriously, just know that every day is a struggle for me, just like it is for you. And I joke and I say that I'm nobody special. There's a piece of me, hello beating stick, that definitely says that. However, I feel that the difference between me and other people are I just close my eyes and jump. I close my eyes and jump and I pray for the best. And if it works, I mean, there's plenty of things. If you go back historically at Twiniversity, we had a magazine that just sucked. I shouldn't say that. And I apologize for everybody that was involved in the magazine, but it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't like, we had to find things that work for us. And Twiniversity could definitely be bigger, and I probably could give it to a corporation who does have an actual structured executive board. But I fear that with that, the soul's going to come out. And I would rather have less with a bigger soul than the other way around. So yeah, guys. So please, I appreciate Meg for everything that she said. And I know that this technically wasn't supposed to be like a Natalie Diaz podcast, but I'm right there with you. So if you're in the trenches and you are brave enough to seek a diagnosis like Meg, or even if you're like, having a diagnosis isn't going to mean anything to me and I just need help, well, now you know where to get it. So we're going to put all the links for Meg below. And if you need anything from her or from me, you could follow her on all her socials, or you could contact me anytime at community@twiniversity.com. And we could even get a message to Meg too, if you want to do it that way and remain anonymous. We're cool with it. However we could help you get the support you need when you need it is what my goal is. So thank you so much, Meg, for playing with me today. For real, like genuinely. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, kiddos, go back to your realities. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I love you guys sincerely from the bottom of my heart. I'm very appreciative that the four of you are listening today, and we will always be here for you guys. So you could slide into our DMs on every single social platform. We're just at Twiniversity on every single thing, or you could email us, like I said. And truthfully, if you did like this podcast and you're like, seriously, she doesn't suck, Meg isn't the worst, just give it a like, because this whole algorithm thing really is the bane of my existence. But the more that you show that we're valid, the more people could learn about us. And ultimately, our goal is to really just make sure that we help as many people as we can. So like, subscribe, all that BS, do what the kids say, smash that like button, you do what you got to do. But until next time, guys, see you later, alligators, and genuinely thank you very much for listening.